My name is Ethan. Until last night, I believed I was the luckiest man alive. For 18 years, I'd been married to Clara, a woman who seemed to light up every room she walked into. She had this way of making people feel special, like they were the only ones in the world when she spoke to them. I thought that included me. Our marriage wasn't perfect, whose is? But it was ours. We had our share of disagreements, moments of tension, but I always believed the foundation was strong. We had built a life together, raised a son who's now in college, and shared countless memories. I never imagined that one night, a single event, could pull the rug out from under everything we had built. It all began with a company event, a celebration for completing a major project. I had been working tirelessly for months, pouring every ounce of energy I had into this. My boss, David, even joked that I practically lived at the office. This party wasn't just a social gathering. It was an opportunity for me to solidify my standing in the company. Clara knew how important this was to me. She promised she'd be there to support me, to help me make a good impression. She looked stunning that night, wearing a deep green dress that made her the center of attention the moment we walked in. I felt proud, even a little smug, having her on my arm. As we mingled with my colleagues, I could feel their eyes on her, their admiration obvious. She laughed at their jokes, charmed them with her wit, and made everyone feel at ease. I was happy, until I wasn't. It started innocently enough. A few light-hearted jokes, a little teasing about how much I'd been working. Clara had always been quick with a playful jab, and I didn't mind. But then her tone shifted. "You know," she said loudly, raising her glass, "Ethan spends so much time at work, I've started calling the office his real home." The crowd laughed politely. I forced a smile, but the comment stung more than I cared to admit. I brushed it off as nerves. Clara had a habit of cracking jokes when she felt out of place, and this was a room full of professionals she didn't know. But it didn't stop there. As the night went on, her comments became sharper, more personal. She told the story of how I'd accidentally locked myself out of the house last month, leaving me stranded in the driveway in my pajamas. People laughed, but I could feel my face burning with embarrassment. When David approached us later in the evening, I was desperate to steer the conversation back to work. I wanted to talk about the project, my ideas for the next quarter, anything to showcase my competence. Instead, Clara jumped in. "Oh, David," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Please don't work Ethan too hard. He's hopeless at home. Can't even change a light bulb without Googling it first." David chuckled, but I could see the glint of amusement in his eyes. It wasn't the good kind. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I was crumbling. Each joke felt like a little dagger, each laugh a twist of the blade. Clara wasn't just making fun of me. She was undermining me in front of the people who held my career in their hands. By the time the dessert was served, I was barely holding it together. Clara, oblivious or unconcerned, continued to bask in the attention. I excused myself and headed for the restroom, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My hands were trembling, my jaw tight. "What are you doing?" I whispered to myself. I didn't know if I was talking to her or to me. When I returned, I found Clara surrounded by a group of my colleagues, including David. She was in the middle of a story, something about how I once tried to cook dinner for her and nearly burned the house down. The room erupted in laughter, and she looked at me, smiling as if she were proud of her performance. For a moment, I just stood there, frozen. I felt like an outsider in my own life, watching as my wife tore down everything I had worked so hard to build. I wanted to pull her aside, to tell her to stop, to ask her why she was doing this. But I didn't. Instead, I forced another smile, sat down, and waited for the night to end. Little did I know, it was only the beginning. The car ride home was suffocating. Clara was still buzzing from the evening, humming along to the radio like nothing had happened. I stared out the window, trying to piece together how the night had spiraled so far out of control. "You were a hit tonight," she said, her voice light and carefree. "Everyone loves you. And your boss?" He couldn't stop laughing. I clenched my fists in my lap. "He wasn't laughing with me, Clara. He was laughing at me." Her smile faltered for a second, but she quickly brushed it off with a wave of her hand. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. It was just a few harmless jokes. You know I didn't mean anything by it. Harmless. I turned to her, my voice shaking. You made me look like a complete idiot in front of my entire team, in front of David. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked to earn their respect? And you tore it all down in one night? For what? A few cheap laughs? She sighed, clearly annoyed now. Oh, come on, Ethan. You're overreacting. It's not like I told them anything that wasn't true. You did lock yourself out of the house. You did almost burn down the kitchen. Lighten up. Her dismissal felt like a slap in the face. I turned back to the window, my chest tight with anger and humiliation. The rest of the drive was silent. When we got home, Clara went straight to the bedroom, kicking off her heels and pulling her hair into a messy bun. I lingered in the living room, pacing back and forth as the events of the night replayed in my head. Her laughter, the mocking looks from my colleagues, David's smirk, every moment was burned into my memory. I finally worked up the nerve to confront her again. I walked into the bedroom, where she was already scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. Clara, I said, my voice low but firm. We need to talk. She didn't even look up. About what? About tonight. About what you did. She sighed dramatically and set her phone down. Fine. Let's talk. What's the big deal, Ethan? Why are you blowing this out of proportion? Blowing it out of proportion? I felt my voice rise despite my efforts to stay calm. You humiliated me, Clara. You took every mistake I've ever made and put it on display for the people I work with. You made me look incompetent, like a joke. Her eyes narrowed. Oh, so now this is all my fault? Maybe if you weren't so uptight all the time, people wouldn't find it so easy to laugh at you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Do you even hear yourself right now? I asked, my voice trembling. Do you even care how I feel? Or is it all just a game to you? She rolled her eyes and stood up, brushing past me to grab a glass of water from the kitchen. You're being ridiculous, Ethan. It's not like I cheated on you or something. I made a few jokes, big deal. Get over it. I followed her, my frustration boiling over. It's not just about the jokes, Clara. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you didn't care how this would affect me. You didn't care what it would do to my reputation, my career. You only cared about being the center of attention. She spun around to face me, her eyes blazing. You're acting like I ruined your life. God. Ethan, grow up. If you can't handle a little teasing, maybe the problem isn't me, it's you. Her words echoed in my head as she stormed back to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the empty space where she had just been. For the first time in 18 years, I felt like I didn't know the woman I had married. The Clara I knew would never have done this. The Clara I knew would have cared about how I felt, would have apologized instead of doubling down. But maybe I never really knew her at all. That night, I slept on the couch. Or at least, I tried to. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her laughter, felt the sting of her words. By morning, I had made a decision. This wasn't something I could just get over. Something had shifted between us, something I couldn't ignore. But I had no idea that things were about to get much, much worse. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Clara bustling around the kitchen. She was humming softly, as if the night before hadn't happened. I lay there on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on me. I finally dragged myself up and walked into the kitchen. She looked up from her coffee and smiled, but there was something in her expression, a mix of defiance and indifference, that made my stomach churn. "Morning," she said casually, as if we hadn't exchanged harsh words just hours ago. I nodded stiffly, pouring myself a cup of coffee without meeting her eyes. The tension in the room was suffocating. "You're not still upset about last night, are you?" she asked, her tone light, but with an edge of impatience. I set my mug down a little harder than I intended. "Upset doesn't even begin to cover it, Clara. Do you even realize what you did to me?" She rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "Ethan, I already told you. It was just a few jokes. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" "Because it is a big deal," I snapped, finally losing the composure I'd been clinging to. You embarrassed me in front of my boss, my coworkers, people I've spent years trying to earn respect from. Do you know what David said to me before we left? She raised an eyebrow, clearly uninterested. What? He said, "You've got your hands full at home, don't you?" He wasn't laughing with me, Clara. He was laughing at me, because of you. For a moment, she looked taken aback, but it didn't last. Her face hardened, and she shrugged. Well, maybe you shouldn't take yourself so seriously. Honestly, Ethan, you're acting like I committed some unforgivable crime. I stared at her, struggling to find the words. It's not just about the jokes, I said finally. It's about the fact that you didn't care. You didn't care how it would affect me, how it would make me feel. You cared more about getting a laugh than about supporting me. She sighed dramatically and turned away, opening the fridge to grab a bottle of water. You're being so dramatic, she muttered. I'm not going to apologize for having a little fun. I felt a cold knot of anger and sadness tighten in my chest. A little fun? That's what you call it. She slammed the fridge door shut and whirled around to face me. Yes, Ethan. It was fun. Maybe if you weren't so uptight all the time, you'd actually enjoy yourself for once. I took a step back, stunned by her outburst. So, that's what you think of me? That I'm just some boring, uptight workaholic? She hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. If the shoe fits. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stood there, staring at her, feeling a mix of anger, hurt, and disbelief. This wasn't the Clara I thought I knew. I don't even know who you are anymore, I said quietly, my voice trembling. She scoffed and brushed past me, grabbing her bag. I'm going out, she announced. I need some air. Maybe you should think about loosening up while I'm gone. I watched her walk out the door, the sound of it slamming behind her echoing in the empty house. I stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where she had been, trying to process what had just happened. For the rest of the day, I couldn't focus on anything. My mind kept replaying her words, her tone, her complete lack of remorse. This wasn't just a fight. This was something deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. When she finally came home that evening, she acted as if nothing had happened. She sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone, completely detached. Where were you? I asked, breaking the silence. Out, she replied curtly, not bothering to look up. Out where? She sighed and put her phone down. Why does it matter? I went to the mall, got a coffee, did some shopping. Is that a crime now? I didn't believe her. There was something about her tone, her body language, that felt off. But I didn't push it. I was too exhausted, too emotionally drained to start another fight. Instead, I retreated to the bedroom, closing the door behind me. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, something much bigger than a few careless jokes at a party. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed were heavy with silence. Clara and I moved through the house like strangers, avoiding eye contact, avoiding each other. It wasn't outright hostility. It was worse. The cold, empty space between us felt like an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted, something that neither of us was ready to face. Clara seemed completely unfazed. She kept herself busy, filling her days with errands and outings. Every afternoon, she'd grab her bag and disappear, offering vague explanations like, I'm meeting a friend, or I need to pick up a few things. I didn't press her. I wanted to believe her, but the unease gnawed at me. I tried to focus on work, but it was impossible. The memory of that night at the party played on a loop in my mind. I couldn't forget the way David had looked at me, the subtle smirks from my colleagues, or the way Clara had laughed at my expense. I could still hear her words, sharp and cutting, like little barbs lodged in my chest. One evening, about a week after the party, Clara announced that she was going out again. She was standing by the door, checking her reflection in the mirror. She had put on makeup, more than usual, and her hair was styled in loose waves. She looked beautiful, but there was something about the effort she'd put into her appearance that made my stomach twist. Where are you headed this time? I asked, trying to sound casual. She glanced at me briefly before turning back to the mirror. Just meeting some friends. Don't wait up. I forced a nod, but my chest tightened. Something about her tone, her body language, felt off. Who are you meeting? I pressed, keeping my voice even. She sighed, finally turning to face me. Do you really need a play-by-play, Ethan? It's just the girls. You don't know them. Her response was dismissive, almost irritated, and it only deepened my suspicion. But I let it go. I wasn't in the mood for another fight, and frankly, I wasn't sure I could handle hearing her brush me off again. When she left, the house felt oppressively quiet. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Clara had always been independent, but this was different. Her absences were becoming more frequent, her explanations vaguer. For the first time in our marriage, I found myself wondering if I could trust her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the clock tick away the hours. When I heard the faint sound of the front door opening, I glanced at the clock. It was past midnight. Clara tiptoed into the bedroom, clearly trying not to wake me. I pretended to be asleep, keeping my breathing slow and steady. I felt the mattress dip slightly as she slid into bed. She smelled like perfume, a scent I didn't recognize, and there was a faint trace of something else, something musky. My heart sank. The next morning, Clara was back to her usual self, scrolling through her phone at the breakfast table while sipping her coffee. I sat across from her, watching her carefully. Late night? I asked, keeping my tone light. She looked up briefly, her expression unreadable. Not really. We just got caught up talking. I nodded, pretending to accept her answer, but my mind was already racing. I knew I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. Something was going on, and I needed to find out what it was. Later that day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I felt like I had no choice. I waited until Clara left for one of her outings, then grabbed her laptop from the desk in our shared office. My hands trembled as I opened it and navigated to her email. I hesitated for a moment, my stomach churning with guilt, but the memory of her brushing me off, the unease that had been building for weeks, it pushed me forward. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Buried in her sent folder was a thread of messages that made my blood run cold. The emails weren't to her friends. They were to someone named Ryan. And they weren't about meeting for coffee or shopping trips. They were intimate, flirtatious, filled with inside jokes and references I didn't understand. One message, in particular, stood out. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about it. Same time next week? I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't paranoia or insecurity. This was betrayal. I sat there for what felt like hours, rereading the messages, searching for some clue, some context that might explain it all away. But there was no explanation. The truth was staring me in the face, and it was undeniable. Clara was having an affair. When she came home that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop in front of me. She walked in, her cheerful demeanor faltering when she saw the look on my face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. I pushed the laptop toward her, the incriminating emails open on the screen. "You tell me." Her eyes widened as she realized what I had seen. For a moment, she looked genuinely shocked. But then, as if a switch had flipped, her expression hardened. "You went through my emails?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusing. "That's what you're worried about?" I shot back, my voice trembling with anger and hurt. "Not the fact that you've been lying to me, sneaking around behind my back?" She crossed her arms, her face defiant. "You had no right to invade my privacy. And you had no right to betray me." I snapped, my voice breaking. 18 years, Clara. 18 years, and this is what it comes to." She didn't answer. She just stood there, staring at me with a mixture of anger and something else, something that looked suspiciously like guilt. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the ground beneath me start to give way. Everything I thought I knew, everything I had built my life around, was crumbling, and I had no idea what to do next. Clara stood there, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. I was waiting for an explanation, an apology, anything, but all I got was silence. So, are you going to tell me who Ryan is? I finally asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. She scoffed, shaking her head. He's just a friend, Ethan. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. A friend? That's what you call someone you're sending messages like, last night was amazing to? Her expression tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might actually own up to it. But instead, she doubled down. You're making something out of nothing. Those messages were harmless. You're just being paranoid. Paranoid? I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. I saw the emails, Clara. Don't insult me by pretending I didn't. She rolled her eyes and walked to the fridge, pulling out a bottle of water. You're acting like a crazy person. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with work all the time, you wouldn't have time to sit around and spy on me. Her deflection only fueled my anger. This isn't about work, Clara. This is about you lying to me, sneaking around behind my back. I deserve the truth. She took a long sip of water before finally turning to face me. Fine. You want the truth? Ryan is someone I talk to when I feel like you're too busy to care. That's it. Nothing happened. Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew she wasn't telling the whole story. Nothing happened? I repeated, my voice heavy with disbelief. Then why hide it? Why lie to me if there's nothing to hide? She sighed, clearly exasperated. Because I knew you'd react like this. You're always so dramatic about everything. I stared at her, my chest tight with frustration and betrayal. You know what, Clara? I don't even know who you are anymore. She didn't respond. Instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I sat there in the deafening silence, my mind racing. I didn't know where she was going, and at that moment, I didn't care. All I knew was that our marriage was falling apart, and I was powerless to stop it. And deep down, I feared this was only the beginning of the unraveling. Clara didn't come home until late that night. I stayed up, sitting on the couch, staring at the door, waiting. When she finally walked in, her expression was a mix of defiance and exhaustion. She didn't say a word, just kicked off her shoes and headed straight to the bedroom. Where were you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She paused for a moment, her hand on the bedroom door. Out, she replied curtly, not even bothering to look back at me. Out where? I pressed, standing up and taking a few steps toward her. She turned around, her eyes flashing with irritation. I don't owe you a play-by-play of my every move, Ethan. Stop acting like I'm some criminal. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. You're my wife, Clara. And after everything that's happened, I think I have the right to know where you've been. She let out a sharp laugh. You're right? Don't make me laugh, Ethan. You lost the right to question me the moment you decided to snoop through my emails. Her words stung, but I refused to back down. And you lost my trust the moment you decided to lie to me. Her face hardened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But instead, she shook her head and muttered, I can't deal with this right now, before disappearing into the bedroom and slamming the door. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the closed door, feeling completely helpless. The woman on the other side of that door wasn't the Clara I had married. This Clara was cold, distant, and defensive, a stranger wearing my wife's face. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past week in my head. The jokes at the party, the late nights out, the emails to Ryan. It all pointed to something I didn't want to admit. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. The next morning, Clara was already gone when I woke up. A quick glance at her side of the bed told me she hadn't slept there. I checked the kitchen, the living room, nothing. Her absence felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. For the first time in 18 years, I didn't know where my wife was or what she was doing. I spent the day in a fog, barely able to focus on anything. My thoughts were consumed by questions I couldn't answer. Was she with Ryan? Was she telling him the same jokes she used to tell me? By the time evening rolled around, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. When Clara finally walked through the door that night, I was ready. I stood in the living room, arms crossed, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but calm. She sighed heavily, tossing her bag onto the couch. "Ethan, I'm really not in the mood for this." "Well, too bad," I shot back, stepping closer. "Because I'm done playing this game. You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and I deserve to know the truth." Her eyes narrowed. "What truth?" "There's nothing going on, Ethan. You're just paranoid. Stop lying to me," I shouted, my voice echoing through the house. "I saw the emails, Clara. I know about Ryan. I know you've been seeing him." For a moment, she looked stunned, but then her expression hardened. "Fine," she said coldly. "Yes, I've been seeing Ryan. But it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my voice trembling with anger and pain. She hesitated, her eyes darting away. "He's someone I talk to. Someone who listens to me when you're too busy with work to care." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "So, this is my fault now?" She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the house once again, leaving me alone in the deafening silence. This time, I didn't wait for her to come back. Instead, I grabbed my car keys and left. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what to do next. As I drove aimlessly through the empty streets, one thought kept repeating in my mind. What happened to us? When I opened her emails, my heart pounded. The messages weren't to a friend or a colleague, they were to him. Ryan. At first, I tried to convince myself it was harmless. But then I saw it. "I really enjoyed spending time with you yesterday. Can't wait for the next one." My stomach twisted. This wasn't a work conversation. This wasn't casual. This was intimacy, shared moments I wasn't a part of. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. It wasn't just about the words. It was the way she had been acting. The late nights, the secrecy, the dismissive attitude. It all made sense now. And yet, even with the truth staring me in the face, I didn't want to believe it. When she walked through the door that evening, I was already sitting at the kitchen table, her laptop open in front of me. She barely glanced at me as she dropped her bag on the counter, humming a tune under her breath. "Hey," she said casually. I didn't return the greeting. Instead, I turned the screen toward her. "You want to explain this?" She looked down, and for the first time in weeks, I saw her expression change. A flicker of hesitation. A brief moment of fear. But then, just like that, it was gone. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. "You went through my emails," she snapped, crossing her arms. "That's a serious invasion of privacy, Ethan." I let out a hollow laugh. That's what she was worried about. "You've been lying to me," I said, my voice cold. "Sneaking around, meeting him. And your biggest concern is that I found out?" She hesitated, then let out a frustrated sigh. "You're being ridiculous. Ryan is just someone I talk to when I need a break. That's all." "A break from what, Clara?" I demanded. "From your marriage? From me?" She pursed her lips. "You've been so focused on work, Ethan. Half the time. You barely even notice when I'm in the room. Ryan listens. He makes me feel valued." Her words stung, but they didn't surprise me. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't regret. It was a justification. I exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the table. "So that's it? 18 years, and you throw it all away for someone who listens better?" She shrugged. "It's not like I planned for this to happen." I stared at her, waiting, hoping for any sign of remorse. But there was none, just indifference. And in that moment, I knew. Whatever we had before, it was already gone. That night, I didn't wait for Clara to come home. I already knew what I needed to do. I sat in my office, staring at a blank piece of paper before finally picking up a pen. It was time to put an end to this. When she walked in hours later, acting like nothing had happened, I didn't even look up. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady, controlled. She sighed dramatically, tossing her purse onto the table. "Ethan, if this is about last night, I really don't have the energy." "I know, Clara." I finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I know everything." For a second, she faltered. I saw the flicker of panic, the hesitation, before she plastered on a fake, exasperated smile. What are you talking about? I saw you, I said simply, at the hotel, with him. Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to say something, but for once, she had no excuse, no snarky comment, no defense. She knew the game was up. I'm done, Clara. I stood up, sliding the envelope across the table. I already filed. I want a divorce. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in weeks, she actually looked shaken. Wait, Ethan, let's just… No, I cut her off. There's nothing to fix. You made your choice and I'm making mine. I expected her to fight, to argue, to throw blame back at me. But she didn't. She just stood there, staring at the papers, her mouth slightly open like she had lost the ability to speak. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. 6 months later. I never thought I'd say this, but getting divorced was the best thing that ever happened to me. At first, it was painful. I won't lie. The first few weeks were a blur of anger, sadness, and self-doubt. But as time passed, something unexpected happened. I started to feel free. Without Clara's constant criticism and manipulations, I felt lighter. I started going to the gym, reconnecting with old friends, focusing on myself for the first time in years. Work got better too. Turns out, my colleagues respected me more than I realized. After the initial embarrassment from the party, people moved on. I worked harder, took on new projects, and just last month, I got a promotion. And the best part? I met someone new. It wasn't planned, and I wasn't looking for anything serious. But one night, while having coffee at my favorite cafe, I started chatting with a woman named Lauren. She was kind, funny, and actually listened when I spoke. There were no passive-aggressive jokes, no belittling, no games. Just two people enjoying a conversation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like me again. Clara and I finalized the divorce with minimal drama. She moved out, and I kept the house. From what I heard, things didn't work out between her and Ryan. Turns out, affairs don't make great foundations for real relationships. Looking back, I can't believe I stayed in that marriage as long as I did. I spent years trying to please someone who never truly valued me. But now, I wake up every morning knowing I made the right choice. And I wouldn't change a thing.